Hello, humans. Welcome to the Audioface Severence series show extravaganza experience. I am Dan. I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Rayyvana. Praise Kier.
Praise Kier.
And
I hope
thank
your
you very
peppers are balanced for today's podcast.
Barely. Shout out to Pep Beats 29 on TikTok or Pep Beats on SoundCloud for the
Oh, you just muted yourself.
I just realized that. Whoops. Thank you, Pet Beats, for the Severance remix and drill, which is, drill has a lot of roots in Chicago. So, I feel like that's a perfectly fine remix to include here for us. But yeah, this is going to be our recap of your Apple TV Productions, Season 2, Episode 5, Trojan's Horse. And I'm kind of liking how there's a slight, I'm not going to read into this at all. There's a slight motif between like last episode being called Woe's Hollow and then this episode being called Trojan's Horse, because it's like English major, it belongs to the Trojan as opposed to like the Trojan horse, which is how you typically hear it about in history. And the term itself is used at one point in the episode, but I don't think it's used in the right way for the plot.
No, not at all.
But yeah, either way, we will be talking about that. Yeah, this was, and then again, we will try to get a little bit more onto things with the show because we're recording this on Tuesday evening and the show premiered Friday evening, so we'll get to it. Don't worry about it. But good to see y'all here. Can't wait to talk about the show. Yeah, do you want to just like jump sort of into it with we can do overall thoughts, but there's definitely one thing that I sent you that thankfully you got a clip of where we were talking about a theory or a couple theories in episode 4, and as we're starting the show, as we're starting to like put our theories out into the world, it definitely feels validating to one, participate in this very fun game about theories about Severance, because I think that's like half the fun of the show. But B, for us to be proven and validated in a lot of cases. For the things that we're just like popping off about, there's actually some merit and it's being proven by the actors themselves unprompted. So I do love that. If you want to jump into that, let's go ahead. But anything you want to say about the show or like in the episode in general that you felt about it, feel free. Or you want to read some comments, we can do that.
I thought it was a good episode. It started off with some Audioface validation, some theories proven correct. So I will say we'll get into more of the details later. But on the last episode, we theorized that when Irv said hang in there, that was a reference to the poster in the break room, which was true. And the whole
time was all you.
The whole time I was watching that scene, I was like, look at the poster! Look at that poster! When Dylan finally walked over there and got the map, I was like, yes!
When Watermelon Irv was staring at the poster, I'm like, my brother in Christ, what more can Ben Stiller tell you?
Right. But one other way in which we were validated was for the Ortbo episode, the outdoor recreation and team building occurrence. Got that one down, I think. Correct me in the audience if I was wrong on one of those words. But we had
I'll be in your performance review.
My monthly. We theorized that it was potentially not that they had not actually gone out into the world, but this was a world carefully constructed by Lumen, potentially even inside the Lumen building for the innies, so they could get a taste of what's outside. Not completely confirmed, but at least aspects of it are confirmed by this interview that Tremel Tillman did, where he gives a little bit more of an insight into that scene. So we can start there.
Of course, Tremel Tillman, the wonderful actor for Seth Milkshake.
Mr. Milkshake.
Unapologetic certified hunk. But let's go ahead and play this.
We had the best crew to ensure that we were safe, that we were warm, that we had everything that we needed at our disposal. And story-wise, it's so cool that Milchek created this world for the innies. Mm-hmm. Everything from the last detail, like the seal that's rotting in the forest, like all of that is it's so smart and so mischievous of him as well. But, the way I see it is that Milchek knew that the innies desperately wanted to be outside. So it's almost kind of like a parent to a child. It's like, oh, you want to go outside? Okay, let me take you outside. This is what's outside, you know, and to create this image of, you know, it's safer indoors.
Can I just say, I love the slight code switching that Trammell does. I pick it up as a very whitewashed black man who's like, oh, you want to go outside? Okay, we'll go outside. Like, that is very much the like parent of like, oh, you want this beer? Okay. Oh, you want to smoke this cigarette? Okay, let's go.
You're gonna smoke the whole pack.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I'm not going to go into like the probably problematic parenting I gave with those examples here. This is not a parenting show. This is a Severance show. All right. Don't trust me with parenting. But that being said, it's like there's this sort of theory of like, I think it's what we're saying, and the revealing part of that, which is where he said, yeah, Milchick crafted this world for the innies out of care for the innies. And you sort of see this in the show that even though Milchick is, you know, plays a little bit of the hard ass with the characters, you start to see, I think in this episode especially, where he's a good company man with Lumen and also where he's willing to like push the boundaries because of, I'm not sure what we know about Milchick that much, but it seems like as a core to his person, he has a different approach to management than Kobelvik, which is where Kobelvik was very like, you know, tight and sharp and like, I don't care, I'm not going to treat them as people. And spoiler alerts in the Rewatch podcast, Miss Wong even kind of criticizes Milchick about this. It's like, you're making the severed employees feel too human, and that's going to cause problems for you. And Milchick very much like, I did not ask for your opinion. That being said, it's also very much recognized by his bosses in the later part of the interview. But I do love to thank God I don't have my melodic or one of my annoying musical instruments here, but otherwise I would toot that shit and I'd be like, Dan and Ray were right.
You're right.
We were playing with some of the scenarios like, can innies and outies exist in the same world? Probably not. Did Lumen create this Ortbo within the office? Possibly. Did Milchick create it? Possibly. And I'm not sure what slap on the wrist that Trammell Tillman's not going to get for revealing this little bit of lore. But to me, it's enough to be like, okay, if Trammell Tillman said it, maybe he wasn't supposed to say it. But I feel like that's enough confirmation with me for being like, the idea was to, okay, you innies want to experience the outside world. Milchick cares about you to give you that experience, but is also enough of a company person to be like,
yeah,
by the end of this experience, you're going to want to go back to work. You're going to enjoy working more. And there's a lot to unpack there with like Severance's whole culture on the work environment, even with that. But yeah, I sent that to you and I was like, I'm so proud of us. Our political skills translate to Severance. So I love that.
And I really like the, analogy he provides that he's like a parent, because in a lot of ways, and this is something that we've been harping on this show for the last couple episodes, is that the innies are children, right? They're just reaching adolescence at this point in their very brief lives because, I think Helly's only a couple months old at most, Mark's about 2 years and some change.
I think Irving's entire life is 12 quarters, which you can like multiply out to think of like each quarter is like a fourth of a year.
Right.
And so,
a little less because they're not there on the weekends. So, but yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, Irving, the oldest one there is, and I'm rounding up, 3 years old.
Right.
And they don't have to do their jobs, but like the social skills, the, situational awareness, the environmental stuff, the stuff that you kind of feel in some portions of knowledge work that you're not doing that well. It's very much prevalent with the severed floor.
But yeah, so I think that's a really apt analogy. Also, another way in which we are vindicated, and we now need some sort of graphic to play, a horn to blare, a shofar, if you will, for all the times we've been vindicated. We learned in the very first scene from this episode where we see this figure. We never really see his face. He's referred to as Doctor in credits for the episode. He takes his little cart to O&D and collects dental tools while whistling the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which is a Gordon Lightfoot song that references the shipwreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald in Lake Superior. So we've been theorizing that this might take place in the Great Lakes region, potentially the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So that's another little hint that that might be the case there. Also, what we learned from that scene is that when he's on that severed floor, that worker is not severed, because he wouldn't know that song if he was a severed worker. However, when he goes down we see him go to the exports hallway and go down the elevator, and we hear the same ding that we hear when the employees for Lumen go through on the elevator to go down to the severed floor. So potentially he might be severed once he's entering that elevator. We're not sure, but what they're doing with the dental equipment, that's the real question. So I got a couple theories here. We saw the hallway, or what is it called? The wing where they have the weird Egan figures. It starts with an S. The name escapes me right now.
I don't know.
But they have a hall there that's just filled with smiles, which was interesting and weird. And they claim to them that it's the continuity wing? The continuity wing. And they claim that those are the smiles of people that Lumen has helped. So, maybe it's these innies like Miss Casey that are getting dental work done there. Of course, there's the theory that the people that Lumen is supposedly killing, like Gemma / Miss Casey, they're staging their deaths. But obviously one way that people are identified is by their dental records. So maybe they're removing their teeth and giving them a set of fancy veneers after the fact, so that those people's remains can be identified.
The exports floor just takes you straight to Ataturk, Turkey. You get your plugs, you get your veneers,
You might see Eric Adams, who knows?
Lumen International. Istanbul is the cure of no,
but yeah, so I think that it's safe to say that this is taking place definitely in Great Lakes region, potentially the Upper Peninsula, potentially in Canada. But what we know
right now in time, I want to say, because there's someone screenshotted one of Mark S's IDs, and it was issued 2020.
Yes.
So if we're just assuming normal issuance IDs, it was probably the time is taking place sometime in between 2020 and 2025 even. So frankly, Severance is dystopian, but it's a modern dystopian show. It's not in the future. It's not in the past, despite some of these CRT screens. Yes.
But it's now. Which is why we see the Audis with their modern technology. They have smartphones. The cars are odd, but that has yet to be explained. But it's
very Soviet, not Soviet, but it's very just after the fall of the wall, sort of like Eastern Europe and Russia, where it's like they have Nokias and they also have all of these random Soviet era cars. That's like, hey, it's still kicking. So they do it.
But yeah, it was interesting first scene. That song, very famous. I sat there and tried to remember the name of it. And so I was humming it to myself until the words Edmund Fitzgerald came up in the song. And I was like, oh, that's the song. That's the song.
Fucking nerd.
But yeah, I know. But I think that it's interesting. We're seeing all of these references, Cold Harbor. We're seeing references to the Great Lakes region. At one point in this episode, Bert's Audi says that him and his husband were going to go on a trip to Milwaukee, which would not be very far from the UP, but they had to cancel it. We'll touch on all of this in a little later, but I do want to talk about this water imagery. We saw the waterfall.
Lumen's logo.
Lumen's logo is a water drop. Behind Milchek's desk, he has there's an iceberg painting. And when we were talking about Irv's Audi, he was in the Navy. When they ask what happened to Irv, before Dylan says, "I don't give two dry fucks what happened to his Audi."
Bar of the season. I don't give two dry fucks.
Fantastic line delivery. His actor is phenomenal. So funny. But we do hear these references to water very frequently in the show. There's a lot of water imagery, and obviously the Edmund Fitzgerald was a ship that wrecked on Lake Superior.
I think even the icy frozen sort of environment of,
Yeah.
you know, Kier, PA, or like whatever they're calling this place and state.
Yeah.
Frozen water, I think, can also be some sort of allusion or allegory to like the frozen state of mind that a lot of people in the
Yeah.
environment are in. Whether they're severed or not, they're still slaves of this company town environment. So
Right.
I think there's a lot, like, I don't think the show, to be fair, because I've dug into a lot of the water analogy stuff, I don't think the show has given us a lot of details about that. I think they've given us some head fakes here and there about some other things that Lumen's interesting, like, oh, there's a mining, there's rare earth animals. Oh, the Neuralink, by the way. But like, I think the water thing, like, it's so obvious, it's right there, it's in the logo, but I don't, and you know, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think the show has given us enough just yet. I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
not there, but I think, and especially all the things you just mentioned with the references to the Great Lakes region, and I always thought, like, just face value, that the Kier company had just taken over Pennsylvania, because I think it's like, you know, it's
Yeah.
urban enough, it's rural enough, you've got enough resources. Like, Pennsylvania is not a bad company state, not giving Elon Musk any ideas, but the Great Lakes region, don't sleep on that either.
Also, Mark W., when they're firing him from his relocation in like the second episode of the show, we hear him say, "I broke a lease in Grand Rapids." So there's another reference to Michigan, Great Lakes region.
I remember that.
Yeah. And he says that Irv's Audi has gone on a long cruise. So there's a lot of water imagery. But yeah, just the last point I want to make about the Edmund Fitzgerald, it's a disaster that's shrouded in mystery. We don't know why that ship sunk. We don't know what happened to cause it. And honestly, the ship should have been traveling at a speed where it could have easily exited the region where it sunk before it did. The last transpondence from the captain said something along the lines of, we're making do. There was not a real distress signal. All 29 crew members died, but 0 bodies were recovered. So there's just a lot of fascinating things about it. If it is something to do with Cold Harbor, obviously the overarching theme is that they want to bring back Kier Egan. We know that to some extent. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's like another mass death event like there was in the Lexington letter once the file is complete. But we can talk more about that because it is referenced in the next scene where we see Mark, he's in his kitchen. He's taking a bunch of pills. He's drinking some mysterious weird liquid that's like milky but chunky and really nasty. He's on the phone with his sister Devin. It's obvious he hasn't told her about reintegration because she's still asking him about trying to burn the image into his retinas. But we also learn that Rugabi is a homosexual and she's moved in to his townhouse and she's scared she's not leaving because she's afraid that there's going to be moles and plants around the neighborhood. She doesn't trust the neighborhood for good reason. We knew that before she murked his ass, Mr. Grainer had intelligence on where she was positioned at the college in the adjacent city. So she's living in the basement now. And we also...
Drive's broken. Very important detail.
We find out that that Severance takes reintegration, is a session-based process. He wants to know when they can start again, says that he hasn't remembered anything, but then she says to him, well, maybe your innie has. So
big tease, and that kind of sets up the whole show.
It does. The next scene we see is a very intense conversation between Helena, not our girl Helena, with Mr. Drummond and Natalie in the boardroom, where he tells her that he asks how she's doing after being drowned essentially by Irv, after being waterboarded. And he says that the medical team,
simulating the sensation of drowning. Let's be
Right.
honest. Let's be respectful to our boy Dick Cheney here. It's not waterboarding. It's not torture. It's just a procedure to simulate the sensation of drowning in order to get classified information out into the record. And you know what? Guess what? We got results. So you know what? I'm just not gonna. I'm not pro torture. I'm not pro torture. I'm just saying both sides, Ray. Both sides.
I do really like this scene though, because we've been talking a lot on the show about how Helena seems really jealous of Helly, and that's something that Britt Lauer, her actress, confirmed, that she's jealous of her innie's freedom that she doesn't really have. She's being groomed to be, I think Milchek refers to her as the leader in waiting for Lumen. But we see her have a lot of malice directed towards the innies in this next clip.
Absolutely. Let's run it.
We're close, Helena. What's he at? 78%?
81 as of Friday.
It won't be much longer. You can do this.
I'm not going back down there.
It won't be you. It will be your innie.
My Annie who tried to kill me. And then the other one tried to kill me. They're fucking animals.
Well, then I guess she's into bestiality.
Heyo.
I'll just fake it again.
We can't take that chance.
We need to clean this up. Milchek's many errors this weekend have forced our hand.
And Father approves.
Father encouraged it.
Okay, can I say right there? I think that's his brother. That's her brother.
That's a pretty common theory. The other thing that people are saying is that maybe they refer to Jaime Egan as father because it's sort of a cult-like scenario, but I think that's definitely possible. Like, he could either be an illegitimate child, so he's not in line for the throne, so to speak, or a younger sibling, although just based on the looks of the two of them, I don't think he necessarily looks younger than her.
True, but I went through Succession, the name of the show that I constantly confuse with Severance. And I was like, okay, so they're able to cast like Whitey McWhiterson and Kieran Culkin, and then Psychopath Deluxe in Jeremy Strong.
Yeah.
And then the redhead baddie, and then the old head, and they're able to be like, okay, so they're family, and because the Time Warner Discovery Corporation has said so, you're gonna believe this, America, for the next 6 years. And so I looks can be deceiving. I also used to think that like there's a connection between Donovan and the guy on the outside who's writing like the We Are, like that book. Like, they have a similar vibe that I've always kind of like picked up on, that I'm not sure is intentional. It could just be my own racism towards white bearded men. But
that's fine.
No. Definitely, I think that was my thought. I was like, okay, the fact that he said father in this context where we already know Helena through going to the severed floor on the Ortbo understands that a lot of like the Kier stories are just bullshit. Like, they're just like, corporate, jargon. And so I would believe that Helena on the outside world with this person, knowing who Helena is, if they're saying father, my take, and it's not a strong one, but at least my take is like, that's not cult shit. That's like, they both call him father. And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what father means in this case, but that means that there's a certain relationship that Helena and I guess Donovan have right here, that even what's her name, Nicole, the other woman,
Natalie.
like Natalie, yes, even Natalie, who's like, oh, don't worry about it, you'll be fine, it's just your any, like Natalie, never mind her obvious skin color, but like she does not have that relationship that like Helly and Donovan have with the head of the organization. So things that make you go
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they also reference that she might need to do They refer to it as some sort of session. It's not in this clip, but so it to me was giving Scientology vibes, like, oh, do you need to go through, essentially what they do with Milchick during his performance review. They say it's atonement session. So I'm assuming that that's a really similar to what the innies do during their times in the break room, but for these people who are not severed in the corporate realm of Lumen. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see more about Drummond's backstory, because we really don't know much about him other than that he has a frolic tattoo on his hand, and that he seems to have some sway in Lumen. He seems to have some sort of powers, which would make sense if he himself is an Egan. But yeah, so not much has been revealed to us on that front yet, but a little bit more exposition on the fraught relationship between Helena and Jaime Egan, her father. Because he obviously doesn't care about her well-being. I mean, he's literally sending her back down there with these people who tried to kill her, rightfully so, and good on Irv for doing that, and I love you, and he could never do anything wrong. Politically. But he just clearly does not really care about her wants, her wishes. She's, her Audi is in effect a slave to this company,
Big time.
In a somewhat
in a different way.
Yeah,
in a different way, in the sense that, like, the privilege, not even just like the privilege of like being the daughter of the owner of the company, but the privilege to be an Audi and visit the severed floor and pretend to be an Innie and go undercover. It's definitely a mind fuck that Innie Mark is feeling pretty heavily throughout this episode too.
100%.
Constantly, I'm not sure if we have the exact of one of these clips, but like Helly and Innie Mark have a lot of these interactions. And again, Innie Mark is going through some very clear reintegration sickness throughout this episode.
He's coughing throughout the episode. Yeah,
and so it leads you to believe that Innie Mark is more self-aware of the whole game than Audi Mark is at this point.
Yeah.
And so, similarly to how you saw Helly in the previous episodes act a lot like Helena on the outside, this episode, and we'll get to this at the very end for sure, but in this episode, I feel like most of the time the Mark S we see is Audi Mark Scout.
Yeah,
who's like in the outside. So yeah. I
mean, 100%. We'll talk about it in a little more in a minute, but the Mark that we see in Innie Mark that we see in this episode is more sarcastic. He is less enthusiastic.
He's really mean and doesn't care about any of the Innies at all. He's really just like, blah, 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 where the fuck is my wife?
Right, exactly. And so, I mean, we're seeing him sort of, he's been deeply betrayed. He's feeling despondent. He feels like there's nothing left for him, which was how we saw Audi Mark at the beginning of the show, before he had any indication that his wife might be alive, when he's drinking himself to death, essentially. But so let's talk about the next scene where they all come back together. This is the first time Helly is back in Lumen since the overtime contingency. Since that day, she has not been on the severed floor since
Glasgow block.
Yeah, the Glasgow block.
The overtime contingency she hasn't been, and then the Helly you saw was like Helly not there, but Helena using the Glasgow block so that her Audi could visit the severed floor as a undercover Innie.
Exactly.
And so that was happening in the last episode. Milkshake goes undo the Glasgow block, and then Audi Helly is transferred out of the severed floor and out of the Ortbo, and Innie Helly is like, a moment ago, I was in the outside world about to give a speech as Helena, and now I'm being the sensation of drowning is being simulated upon me.
Right.
So, it's not torture, it's the simulation of the sensation of drowning.
And next thing she knows, seemingly, is that the elevator door is opening and she's looking at this fucking child soldier, Miss Wong, sitting in front of this creepy ass painting, Kier Pardons His Betrayers, and she is deeply confused, deeply fucking
Fuck, I
confused.
missed that. I missed Kier Pardons.
Yeah,
so
it's
rough.
it's so disturbing. I mean, but also another hint that we are in the northern part of the United States is that Kier Egan was a Union soldier in the Civil War, and he's wearing a Union soldier uniform in that picture. But anyway, so she leads her into Milchick's office where we are reunited with Dylan and Mark, all of them confused, and again, more sort of alluding to them being children. They all start yelling over one another, trying to figure out what the fuck happened to Irv. Helly wants to know how she was violated. She starts feeling extremely violated that Helena was using her body and stealing her personality. And then we've also got Mark, who just wants answers, especially considering the fact that he just fucked this lady who he thought was Helly and is now learning that he was sexually assaulted by Helena Egan. And Milchick, in true Milchick fashion, like a parent, quiets them down and tells them a story, a ridiculous story about a Swedish...
Of questionable truth.
Of questionable truth. Well, the story is that he is alluding to is a real story about, I believe it was a Swedish king who would don a gray raggedy coat and walk amongst his people. He says it's a story.
Undercover boss.
Yeah, it was undercover boss. Milchick says that it happened in ancient times. We know that it was the 17th century, so we would not refer to that as ancient times, but Milchick likes to lie to them to throw them off about what the time period might be.
The Grachschuppen.
Grachschuppen, yes. And essentially saying that Helena was donning the outfit and personality and body of an innie.
In the great tradition of Kier.
And the great tradition of Kier, who did this in his ether factories to walk amongst them and learn about the company. We know that's not true. And the innies are not buying it for one fucking second, especially Dylan, who just wants to know what the hell happened to his friend. And it's at this point that Milchick says that he was terminated and he's on a long extended cruise, which again,
his Audi is on a cruise.
Right. We find out is not true, but Dylan's like, I don't give a shit about my Audi. Or about
he
the
doesn't
Audi.
Give 3 dry fucks about his Audi. Let's be clear.
He wants
not
to know
one,
what happened
not
to his
two.
friend.
Count them 3.
And they find out that Irv's not coming back, and Dylan is distraught. So, I mean, we're seeing tensions grow. They go to their office space, the macrodata refinement office, and his desk is gone. And now they have this holy triad situation there, this triumvirate of desks, as opposed to the 4 desks that they've typically had. And Irv's been photoshopped out of all of their pictures, which is a reference back to what Milchick said. All of your personal belongings will be cleared, your desk will be cleared, and your personal interactions will be erased. Yeah. So, and I mean, they can get rid of all these physical reminders of Irv, but they can't get rid of the influence that he had on them. So Dylan asks for a funeral, to which Mark responds, sure, as long as it's quick. Because Mark is fucking losing his mind right now. He just wants to give up on everything. All of their...
He's like been reintegrating through this point where he gets back to the computer at his desk and he's like kind of twitching around a little bit in the way you like have to when you're severed and unsevered. And so he's mostly like in the Helena way. Like mostly it's Audi Mark Scout speaking. And he's like, yeah, later in the episode, he uncharacteristically leaves 7 minutes before the time you're supposed to clock out.
Yeah.
And yeah, you definitely see that. And it's not the kind of Mark who was, you know, about the job and is supposed to be like the middle manager of the floor in between Kobelvig or Milchick and the other 3. But you see the Mark who is like trying to keep things going, not because he cares about the team and morale, but trying to keep things going because Audi Mark is on a mission. And he's like, I don't care about these people. This is the outside world, which is interesting when you think of the show as a, you know, a story, a microcosm of the modern American working experience. Right?
Yeah. I mean, what's really interesting to me here is it does sort of mirror when your coworker gets a new job and they leave, because for these people, this is the whole world they know. That's your friend. But you in the corporate world do forge relationships with your coworkers. You do become friends. You spend time together outside of work. But typically once they quit, go to another job, that friendship will end. And it's as if they died. Their things are taken out of the office. If they left under bad circumstances, if they were fired, the corporation you're working for will try to make it as though they never existed. It could become taboo to even talk about them. So we're getting this obviously amped up version of that. But these people, particularly Dylan and Helly, Mark obviously is off in his own world at this time, but they want to see some sort of fanfare for the experience. So Milchick agrees to let them have a small funeral and tells
Not a bereavement.
right. But he does tell Miss Huang to prepare the bereavement kits, and it's at this point that we get these Irv mugs, these mugs with his face on it that we see in the intro for this season. But
Good
they
catch.
have pre-made, ready to print those same mugs with Mark's face, with Dylan's face, and even with Helly's face on them in case they die, which is pretty shocking. But again, in the corporate world, the workers are expendable. It's all about the profits, the greater mission of the company, not caring about the actual workers. So they're really good. They're really good at alluding to that, I think, in this show.
Yeah, and we talked about it a little bit earlier. We'll get to this really great scene where essentially any Dylan, in one of his most like any Audi experiences, at least at this point we don't know that he is going through reintegration. But this, and we know Dylan to be a little bit of in the words of Milchick, very salty with occasional bits of sugar. We know of any Dylan to be like this, but I think while Dylan has not gone through integration proper, I think his story is actually purposely different. Because whereas the Innie and Audi, like the way that Mark and Helly's experience is framed is that their Innies and their Audis are trying to get more relationship to each other. The way Dylan is framed is that Dylan has found himself at work, and that's his foundation for fixing everything else that's wrong in his life.
Yeah.
But he has no way to do that.
Right.
Any Dylan wants a kid. He wants a family. He wants to make his wife happy. And when he realizes that his Audi doesn't always do the greatest job of making him happy, in addition to many other moments that we saw in season 1, that's like when his Joker starts to come out. And Audi, any Dylan is not great at hiding the, honestly, none of them are, but like any Dylan especially is not great at hiding the Joker. But I think by the end of the episode, maybe he's a little bit better than some other characters. But I do like here, like that entire sequence, like when they were dot matrix printing out the sign that you'll see in the beginning of this next scene of, you know, Irving B, when he was born, what quarter, when he died in what quarter. And the way Dylan describes that, it really does get to that thing you were describing of they're not dead in the real world. They're not dead, but because they left and went to another company under good, bad, or neutral circumstances, after 6 months, they might as well be.
Right. And I'll just say again, how it mirrors the working life. Think about how many hours you spend at your office or in your job, doing your job. At least for most of us, 40 hours a week that we are sat next to these people who you forge these bonds with, you forge these relationships with.
In our adult life, it's oftentimes more than our, parents. Yeah. It's more than our, siblings, maybe niece and nephew, possibly even more than our significant other. We're spending time with these people.
Absolutely. And like you think about it, you go home, you have some hours of relaxation, but then you are asleep for most of that time that you're not at work. So it really is for them, but for us, like these are the people in our lives. These are the people, our comrades, so to speak, that we're forging these relationships with. And for them particularly, they're trying to figure out their place in the world, in this world where they only exist at work. So these are their closest friends, whether they want that to be the case or not. I'll also add that we see a little bit more aspect of Lumen dehumanization when Miss Huang says, "May I say a question?" which is a weird way to phrase that. And then Milchick grants her permission and she says, "You shouldn't let them hold a funeral. It makes them think, or it makes them feel like people." So again, these are just cogs in a machine, much like we are at our jobs, a lot of us, just cogs in a machine working towards this supposed greater purpose, which we do not reap the benefits from whatsoever.
Or, you
But
know,
yeah.
we're told that we're lucky to reap the benefits that are, you know, underpaid salaries for doing what 10 years ago would have been 3 jobs in one. Right?
Exactly.
So, like, we're told to be like, be happy that you're even getting this. And, you know, frankly, like, I'm going to try not to get into my own workplace, Dan, because I know some of my coworkers don't listen to this podcast. But I'll just say that, like, you know, it's bigger than that. It's bigger than capitalism, right? Like, the system has us by the balls. Either I work a job I'm even okay with, or, you know, I work a job I absolutely hate, but at the end of the day, that's like keeping me away from not having a roof over my head, not being able to get food consistently, not even being able to have luxuries of participating in my hobbies, such as like podcasting and streaming, right?
Right.
An incredible privilege. I'm not trying to, like, you know, belittle or anything, right? But yeah, it's this sort of sense that, like, okay, at the end of the day, we've got you by the balls, tits, whatever. Like, you know, like we've got you. You're
Yeah.
our property, truly. And this is now DEI and CRT now, but we used to have a much closer, literal, less hidden relationship between workers and property in this country. It's just become less, you know,
Right.
we give you a salary. Of course, you need that salary to eat and drink and breathe, but, you know, it's a salary. So there's a gap in between slavery and freedom.
Yes.
Right? Like, you're not a slave because you have money. Now, what do you need that money for? To live. But, like, you're not a slave. As long as you continue working and doing what we say. Yes, go ahead.
Last thing I'll say to drive this point home before we play this next clip, which is really good. But also, I just want to add this context. Before the clip plays, they get 9 seconds of silent grief to grieve their dead coworker, which is very funny, very Lubin thing to do. But you know, in the real world, if you lose your job, you can lose your entire livelihood. You can lose your housing. You can not be able to afford your bills. You lose your insurance. You can't go to the doctor.
Anyone you're taking care of also.
Exactly. In the world of severance, for these severed employees, if you lose your job, you die, which is not far off for how a lot of people exist in the real world doing our real jobs, because
snaps to that.
Just the repercussions of what happens to you are so severe. I mean, is it a literal death? For some people, the answer is yes. It is literal. Like, if you
lose everything and you're living out on the street, and, you know, I want to scream every time liberals and also conservatives say, oh, of course you want to come out to California. It's great to be homeless there. It's going to be 40 degrees tonight in Southern California. And yes, I live in Southern California, but you know what? God damn it, I also live by the beach. And guess what? The beach and the desert are fucking cold at night in the winter. Okay. And people can't survive in that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when you create a society where the only other option are social services that the richest man in the world, as we speak, is actively trying to cut for people. Yeah, it's really one of those severance things where, thank you for expressing it, Ray, and I'm sorry for filibustering, but you just like made such a good point. Like, severance exaggerates a lot of dynamics within the modern workplace. But yeah, for a lot of people, especially, you know, you might be really skilled, but you happen to lose your job at the wrong time, where, you know, a lot of federal workers are losing their job, which means a lot of federal workers that are very skilled are looking for jobs. And the truth is, there are not, everybody says, oh, just join the private sector. There are not enough jobs in the private sector for these people, because the private sector, in the government, you'll be doing the job of 3 people. In the private sector, you'll be doing the job of 6 people, and maybe you'll be making a little bit more money, but you're so much more expendable. Right. And so it really does mean death sometimes when you lose certain jobs. And we shouldn't live in that society, but, you know, we do a political show for that. Don't talk to me about that right now.
Yeah, we'll talk later about the ramifications of losing highly skilled, highly educated workers in doing public service jobs in the
We have
ramifications.
plenty of Power Report to do that, but you know,
Right.
let's start running through these clips because I know it's getting late.
Yeah, let's show Dylan's eulogy, his very beautiful eulogy that actually made me tear up at Irv's funeral.
Real good.
It's hard to pinpoint a favorite Irving story. For the least fun guy in the world, he was really fun. He put the dick in contradiction.
I gotta pause there and be like, Milchick is definitely not a fan of Dylan's crassness,
Right.
but is I'm taking on my Power Report character where I just choose to defend the most undefensible person just for fun.
No, it's
In
fine. I was
defense-
just about to defend him, so.
In defense of Milkshake, Corbell wouldn't have even entertained a funeral for these people.
No.
Wong was like, and you know, Mr. Wong said actually a very interesting thing that I want to like quickly jump back to. Don't we usually do bereavement experiences for innies who die on the severed floor? Miss Wong, do you mean innies constantly die on the severed floor?
Right. How
So
frequent
much
does
that there's
this
a
happen?
process? Okay, so like that's a one-off in the entire thing, but I think we've got to put a pin on that and come back to that in like a future episode because I think that was something that
Right.
combined with your fact that like they already have the heli and the Mark mugs like on lock ready to go. That's an interesting tell. But yeah, I in defense of Milkshake, he doesn't like this. His performance review is gonna ding him 7 ways till Sunday for doing this. But he has a fundamental, or at least at this time, he has a fundamental belief that giving these workers a semblance of humanity is actually going to make them work better.
Right.
And again, I think you see that in the corporate world where you're like, okay, you have some managers who are just like, you're a number, you're a hard ass. And then you have some managers who actually are personally fulfilled by managing and cultivating talent.
Absolutely.
And Milchick's not necessarily that guy, but he's way more of that than most of the people we've seen in Severance so far who have access to their memories outside of the severed floor.
Yeah. I think it's just also just an allegory how someone who might be your direct supervisor who interacts with you on a daily basis, like Milchick does, sees you less as a statistic and more as a whole human being than someone. I mean, obviously it's hit hard on the head here, but in the administrative side of things, who's literally floors and floors and floors above you, not seeing you on the day-to-day. So he really does see that these are not mindless workers. These are real people, even if they are severed and this is not who they are on the outside. He's seeing them form personalities, grow as people, build these relationships, and does not view them with that same harshness that, you know, Miss Huang, who hasn't had as much time there as he has, or as Drummond, who does not interact with them in any capacity, or as Helena, to some extent, who her experience with them is also somewhat limited. But I think that even her perception
Transactional at best.
shifted. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, we'll finish the eulogy and then move forward.
I'm sorry, my super last point is that I don't know if you have this clip, but later on in the show, in an odd defense of Milkshake, Milchick is about to go on his performance review and he pulls Natalie to the side and he's like, hey, I know accepting these gifts is a good thing, but like, how'd you really feel about that? Because I know these are weird things. And Natalie's just like, Drummond's waiting for you for your performance review.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's some aspect, again, I've seen managers who are like, they will shield certain things from their direct reports because they know how bad management is. And they will shield certain things from management because they know that if they knew those things, that it would be bad for those direct reports. And so truly Milchick is the middleman.
Yeah.
And generally the middleman in capitalism and middle management more broadly is just like not looked at as very well. But you really see like a humanizing element to like, yeah, he's a little bit of a hard ass. He's kind of playing the villain here, but he's an anti-hero actually. And there are villains that are, you know, we see Marvel movies where there are like anti-heroes and villains. In this time, the anti-heroes and the villains are in a corporate chart. They're in a hierarchy. And so
Right.
it's kind of easy to tell with them. And that goes to the grand allegory of the show as a workplace drama.
Absolutely.
I'm done. I'm ready to continue.
One time, he was pissed at me for watering down the toner, so he put toner in my water cup. He stopped me before I drank it, though. He just wanted to make a point, not harm me
The
physically.
way his eyebrows are twitching in emotion.
But I did accidentally take a sip of it later because I forgot he said that.
Give this man an Oscar.
He asked me for help with something near the end, and I didn't listen. And in his final moments, he would have been totally justified in telling me to suck my own fuck. But he didn't. He was awesome and I miss him.
Helly says nothing. Adam really says nothing. It was just Dylan who actually gave a non-watermelon faced eulogy of Irving. So
Yeah.
I think that's a very powerful scene.
But then immediately after this, Milchek leaves them alone. Again, I think because Miss Wong was going to play her theremin once again. And apparently she practiced for them and stay in the room, but he pulls her out. They leave. He goes to do his performance review. She could have stayed, but he tells her to go to give them some alone time. Again, I think recognizing their humanity in a small way there. But there's this awkward conversation where they confront Mark for being a piece of shit. And Mark says, he's not dead. He's just not here, which is not necessarily true. I mean, could he even come back? We don't know yet. But it's at this point that Helly confronts Mark and they have this very contentious conversation where he confesses to her, not that he had sex with her, Outie, he does not confess that to her, but that he can't trust her because he doesn't know if she's Helena. Dylan tells her that Miss Casey was his wife on the outside and that she's dead, and we see the Helly that we
And
know.
that was kind of, and I'll just say really quickly, like Dylan said that because Mark was being
cagey.
No, he was being cagey, and also I think it's weird because very much in a workplace kind of way, I think you like your coworkers, but you're also less because of your coworkers specifically, but because of the environment of a workplace where you know these things are at stake. There's a little bit of distrust to be like, okay, how do they really feel about me? How do they really view me? Right? Like, are they ratting me out? Right? And there's a very contentious thing between like Helly is not trusted, Dylan is distraught and is really feeling some emotions, and Mark is emotionally unavailable and also trying to hide his own bag. And so you see all of these non-work emotional things going on, which is the point to what you're talking about, where Dylan's like, okay, well, if you're going to be unemotional about this, let's just like bring us back together here. We know your wife. We're here. Like we're actually in this. And that makes the Helly thing weird because to our knowledge, Helly has no knowledge of what Helena was up to.
Right.
And then Mark is ambiguous because he's like doing reintegration. He's half severed, he's half not. And so Dylan says that out of anger, but I think that's also like establishing the three of like Mark's issue, Adam Scott. I did it again. Mark's issue is reintegration. Helly's issue is like a sense of self and feeling separate enough from her Egan counterpart. And Dylan is like the most real one here currently. I'm just like, you know, I'm just here. There's something I'm going to do. I'm just trying to put my head down, do my job, get home because I'm not a main character in an Apple TV show, and I'm not the heir to be in an Apple TV show. I'm just a worker, and Irving got me, and now he's gone.
Yeah.
So Dylan is the real Marxist in this show right now. But yeah, he says that in an attack, and then he is alone. No Milchek, no Miss Wong, no one else. Helly and Mark are going through, like you said, their kind of like argument about not trusting each other. Helly does a really Helly thing, which is just like, okay, I'm sorry, but you're also being a fucking asshole.
Yeah. I mean, and
Which
she's
is a
right, because she's like, you're not mad at me, you're mad at Helena. And he says, what's the difference? You know, again, showing that versus Dylan, who sees them as very different people, is Helly, who sees them as very different people at this point. And Mark's always sort of been like this a little bit, that he doesn't see this huge disparity between him and his Audi. He does sort of see them as the same person. He was diverging from that path a little bit when he was being selfish and formed this physical relationship with who we now know was Helena and not Helly. But now he's snapped out of that because he's maybe just trying to
well, Annie realizes that he's kind of searching for his wife, if not fully in the first half of the episode. It's been leading through the season, and you start to see it through the end.
Absolutely. But yeah, so Dylan's left alone in the room to say his final goodbyes to Irv, and we get this wonderful magical moment that literally made me jump out of my seat and cheer.
It's looking longingly at the watermelon.
Okay, asshole. Guess this is it. Sorry I let you down.
Why they gotta let black actor Dylan longingly look at the watermelon, huh? Okay, Apple TV, I see you.
But he finally notices the "Just Hang in There" poster, which are the last words that Irv said to him. And the fact that Irv is staring directly at the poster is so perfect. He could not have planned this better.
Ben Stiller didn't direct this episode, I don't believe, but you know, great direction.
Right.
A little fan service, but great direction. So he reaches behind the frame and sees the note of the floor that that Irv was mapping. I forget it's
the exports hallway.
floor. Yeah, the exports hallway. And these are directions from optics and design. So again, these are, I have no idea how he's remembering these directions, because it's like 20 left, right, down, long hallway type thing. But Dylan, again, Helly is trying to figure out who she is. Mark is trying to figure out what's going on. Dylan is the one who's actually like doing the work right now.
Mm-hmm. So then he folds it back up and puts it back behind the poster, and the scene ends. But it was just so rewarding. We know that Felicia gave those directions to Irv. That's in Irv's shitty handwriting. He wrote it down on the back of the paper that she saw, the picture of the exports hallway. And someone actually mapped it out with the maps that we have from the show, and it actually does lead somewhere. So that's where the exports hallway is.
And it's the same hallway we see in the beginning of the episode with the dentist.
Yes, so it'll be really interesting to see where they take this in the next episode, because that's all we see of Dylan for this episode. But one other thing I'm going to mention is that in the first scene where they're all together in Milchek's office, Milchek threatens him by saying certain privileges will be taken away if you don't stop. Obviously referencing the meetings with his wife, his Audi's wife.
And particularly stop, like, you know, bad mouthing, because he's really not doing any sort of, like, you know, definitely Mark and Helly are doing a lot more sabotage, as they say in France. But like Irving, like Dylan B is just like got a loud mouth. Like he's got a tough mouth. He's got a tough tongue. And as we see, I'm gonna skip through this part, but like Milchek gets the most comical, like this is the most satirical part of the episode, the performance review. Yeah. Because anyone who has been through a corporate performance review is gonna be like, did you really waste ink on saying that I did the paper clips wrong?
Right. That I used too many big words.
I mean, listen, in defense of Milchek, as another highly educated in the English language, to the point where it was completely ridiculous, like black person, I got that. And I was like, again, the Natalie way, there's something deep. because you don't win as a Black person.
Yeah.
If you are super educated and you learn all the big words and you can talk with the white educated people and you can impress them, you impress them enough to get into the room. But once you start, using that education, that knowledge, it's like, the fuck is a Greg shopping? And like, I get it. Definitely Milchick's character has been written really well for a Black character, honestly, in a TV show, right? But like, he's been written as this kind of like know-it-all smartass. But at the corporate level, in the words of Jay-Z, still nigga. Like, he is still treated as like, okay, listen, you're too smart and we're penalizing you.
Yeah.
You're too detailed and we're penalizing you. And then of course the monthly performance report, which I think is obscene. Like, quarterly is bad enough, but like
monthly is insane.
Monthly is obscene. If Biden were still in office, I would say go to the National Labor Relations Board if you're getting monthly performance reviews, but you're screwed right now.
Right.
Anyways, yeah, Milchick is just going through these things, and there's a lot of funny stuff where Drummond's like, if this needs to be a longer meeting, then we will have an intermission and you can get lunch from a prepared menu. And Milchick's like, well, hopefully that's not necessary. And then Drummond's like, here's the lunch menu.
Yeah. Also,
so,
there's a part where Drummond says, when he's saying the good things about Milchick, he says, your attendance and your analysis have been great, which feels like, oh, Lumen is this company that is reaching so far into his life that they're doing your analysis test. But then if you think about it, plenty of workplaces do drug testing and random drug testing of their employees, which is a massive overstep into our lives, especially when you think about fucking Milchick's job. What the hell does he need to be regularly drug tested for? That's absurd. But I mean, it is, again, I mean, it feels ridiculous when they say it, but it's like, oh wait, that is something that happens to people on a regular basis in the non-severed world.
Yeah, and I think it affects people with blue collar workers a lot more.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's fair, right? Like, I have not been drug tested as a white collar worker, frankly, ever. And, maybe I'm doing too much 4K here, but like, I'm not someone who really uses drugs in the workplace. I know people who do.
Yeah.
And they're fairer skinned than me, and they're definitely never getting drug tested.
Yeah.
And one of them is Elon Musk. So anyway, do we want to go to clip 5 here, which is my favorite of the scene?
Yeah, just a little bit of
before
this clip. Drummond tells Milchick to tighten the leash on the innies, to stop treating them like humans because of the disastrous Orpo. He also says a really interesting line, which is, Mark Scout's completion of Cold Harbor will be the greatest accomplishment in human history, or will be remembered as such, which just goes to show how much value is being put on this event. And obviously that's not going to be the fucking case. I mean, but I think it does sort of give us a little bit of it gives the theory a little bit of weight that it's going to bring back the resurrect Keir Egan. He also at one point says the work is mysterious and important, which is exactly the way that Mark described what they were doing last season. So just a little interesting information from Drummond there about Cold Harbor. But yeah, so then after this, there's a small clip of Rickon and Devin talking about Rickon writing the version of the We Are for the innies. And it's shit. It's dog shit. It's all about praising Keir and coming together to do Keir's work. But this is where
it's like your favorite rebellious rock star selling out. It's literally that. It's like, you wrote this metal book about like understanding yourself, and now you're making corporate propaganda. And I think like his wife is like seeing him some type of way, and he's like, I get it, but also Lumen's paying me a dog shit ton of money,
right?
And you looked at me some type of way when I was just like writing this random book for cranks, but now that I'm writing a corporate book, I could possibly support your career,
right?
I don't know. let's play 8-ball.
So that was interesting.
Yeah.
Mark then is doing macro data refinement. He gets up 6 minutes early and goes to the elevator, and we get this This very intense scene between him and Milchek, and he's tightening the leash.
It's very revealing. This is after Milchek confirmed to Drummond that he's tying the leash. And also, this is after Mark has gone through an entire episode, but definitely for sure the last half of the episode, a lot of integration sickness. So going back to what was said earlier, like maybe his outie isn't feeling it, but his innie's feeling it, Mr. Krabs. And yeah, this is phenomenal work from Adam Scott and definitely also Terrell Truman. So I cannot wait to play this scene. So yeah, Mark is entering the elevator 7 minutes early to leave the severed floor, and then yeah, Milchek stops him.
Hi, Mark.
Mr. Milchek.
I see you left work 6 minutes early. May I come in? How was the rest of the funeral? Did you get what you needed from it?
Yeah, sure. Hey, did Miss Wong take notes? I can't wait to read her article about it in that newspaper you showed me. What was it called again? The Bullshit Gazette?
Hopefully now
Real
we can
Mark
put all
Essevier.
this grief and tumult behind us and look forward to some productive work days ahead.
Oh, you mean putting the numbers in the thing?
Refining.
Right.
Yes. Does that sound good?
Whatever you say, Mr. Milchek. Praise cure.
Sorry. First of all, everything Mark said is the sound of someone who doesn't care about being fired, which is different from how you sound on the severed floor, which is how Helena was kind of telling herself in 4K. Second of all, my film friends have pointed this out. There's a line in the wall in the elevator. And once Milchek is like, fuck you, I know you're an outie, he crosses the line in the elevator, like very in the scene.
Yeah.
It's a one take shot. And so when Milchek specifically does this, this is why Oscars are given out. Because the symbolism and the tone is symbolisming and toning right now.
Did you and Heliot catch up?
We did.
Did you tell her that you fucked her outie at the Orpo? Helena Egan, leader in waiting of this company.
You're beneath her.
Right. You're just an innie.
Have a restful evening.
Great scene. I'm glad that you pointed out the cinematography in the show, because there's another scene, I didn't pull the clip, where Helly goes and asks Mark how he's doing in the bathroom, and she is reflected back in the mirror. You see her Mark, and then her reflection in the mirror, and Mark is obviously still grappling with Helly versus Helena, doesn't know how to feel about it, but there is just so much phenomenal cinematography where they divide the scene into two parts to reference the innies and outies, and they're phenomenal at that. I do just sort of want to rush through the next scene where we see Irv. No clips, but Irv, we catch up with him, his outie, who's not on a cruise, wouldn't you know it. He goes to the same payphone that we saw him use earlier, and he's talking to someone on the phone, and he says, I think they caught on to what my innie was doing. And then he sees this car that we know Bert is driving that was following him before. He goes up and confronts him. And Bert, he's like, why are you following me? And Bert says, well, when someone shows up at my door in the middle of the night screaming my name, banging on it, I want to know why they were there. So we know that they didn't really have a conversation after that. But then we learn that Bert did not retire. He was canned for having a relationship,
an unsanctioned relationship with an innie.
Yeah. So he says maybe that was you, maybe that's why you were there, I don't know, but mentions now that his husband's name is Fields, and they have some back and forth, Bert and Irv, some good banter, and then Bert says, hey, why don't you come over for dinner? We can talk about this and try to figure everything out. So that's where we leave them off. Hopefully the next episode we'll see that dinner. Maybe we'll get to learn a little bit more about his husband Fields, and
what Bert knows and what he doesn't.
Exactly. That it is interesting that they fired him and they told him that, because they could have told him anything, but they told him that that's why he was fired. So we'll learn more about that later. But the next scene, the last scene of the show, it's Mark in his basement talking to Ragabi, who he's bringing her food from the grocery store. And this one line that stuck with me since I watched the episode, I keep thinking about it. She apparently asked him for eggnog, and he says, eggnog, there was no eggnog. I guess it's not in season, which is interesting from our perspective, because every time we've seen this town, Kier PE, wherever it may be, it's been snowy, it's been cold, they were outside in the snow on their Orpo, but eggnog is not in season, which means it's not Christmas time. It's not really winter time. I mean, it could be, we know that the course of the show has taken place over like
months,
in the span of a couple months, and
3 to 6 months. Yeah.
It's
so like there's
been snowy.
That's
so
a
what
good
the hell is that
yeah.
about? If eggnog's not in season, it's not Christmas time, you know, what's
snow,
going on?
water, like for all the people who are like, Lumen is a technologicalized sort of, you know, they implant brains into people. Freudian slip. They implant chips into people, and they do all of this mysterious work with like water and self-defense cards and things like that.
Right.
Also, there's a goat wing, and you know, like, there's all this other different stuff, and you're like, is Lumen the circle of life? Actually, like you don't get it, but you definitely get there's some weird stuff, like you just said. Thank you for pointing that out. But like it's been so weird for eggnog to be out of season in 6-month perpetual winter.
Right.
Unless the climate change story, which we know it's not.
We also see how anxious Mark is to have his next reintegration session. Obviously, he wants to find his wife. They talk about her ashes, and he says, I don't know who the hell's in there. And so Ragabi mentions that they have people at the morgue. And we hear Mark repeat the line that he said about Irv, which about Gemma. He says, she's not dead. She's just not here. So both his innie and outie said that line, another sign of their reintegration. And then Ragabi says that they'll maybe be ready to do another session tomorrow, but that they're not ready at that point. She wants to monitor his reintegration sickness more, and he gets up to leave, and that's where we see this scene, this phenomenal scene.
I love when outie Mark experiences any Mark's memories.
Yes.
And let's play that.
Your outing can parallel park in less than 20 seconds.
And the dual cinematography of a long alleyway and a home.
With grace. Your Audi pays all of his gas and electric bills within 3 business days. Your Audi listens to music while shaving, but not while showering.
And it looks like outie Mark is walking into the severed
Your
floor.
Audi prefers 2 scoops of ice cream in a serving, but they must be the same flavor.
Mark S. Autism confirmed.
Your Audi once captured a butterfly.
There she is.
Your Audi is going to be...
And right when she says your Audi is going to be, he severs out.
Yeah. And the
he's
scene
back to outie
ends.
Mark.
He's
and the show
crying.
ends.
Ugh. And it's so good. And the theories are running wild, running rampant about what she was going to say. A lot of people think she was going to say your Audi is going to be a father, referencing the unprotected, we're assuming, sex he had with Helena. I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to that theory. I hope it's not true, but there's a lot of imagery in the intro of little babies crawling around, a little baby with Kier's head on it. So could they potentially be trying to resurrect Kier Egan into the baby of Mark and Helly? We don't know. God, I hope not. The show couldn't get any more complicated than that.
HR! I didn't know this is an allegory of one of Elon Musk's companies.
Oh God. But yeah, I mean, a fantastic episode. I'm hoping for more Kobelvig in the next one. We didn't see her at all in this episode, but she's got so much to do. For the next episode, I'm hoping that we see that dinner between Irv and Bert and Fields, Bert's husband. Yeah, it obviously, like every fucking episode of the show, it leaves you wanting more. You want the answers immediately. Just gotta wait 2 days to see it. And I'll text Dan as soon as I finish watching it, as soon as it comes out, telling him how good it was. So telling him to text me as soon as he watches it.
No, yeah, it has become appointment TV. The more people I turn on to it, the more people are getting into it. I need to start complicated things. I'll talk about it when we're done airing. There are just a couple of comments that, because people are wonderfully watching the show while we're doing it, so I want to get through some of those. Bad Lefty saying muted Dan is Lefty's fave Dan. Love you, really appreciate you. Omega Shenron Dragon says, "Oh F, I'm watching that show. Never mind." Which is fair. Yes, there are spoilers to the show. I will have a banner up here that says like Severance show up here soon, so it'll be there. Elude 427 says, "No joke. I think I'm employed here IRL."
Oh God, I hope not. But
I hope not.
They do a really good job at making parallels to what the work life is like for all of us here in the unsevered world. And Severance coming soon with Neuralink.
I was telling Ray that I had been in a real series of, LA fires, Trump administration, Elon Musk, all the different personal things I don't even talk about online, like going on. And I took like a 4-day weekend this past week, and walking outside felt like I was an Audi who had just gotten out of the elevator. I literally had no memory of either my brain at work for the past month, or also no memory of like outside for the past month. And I have a particular job and a very online work from home job, and also like doing content creation as a free hobby. So I can get away with spending a lot of time in my desk and like, pretend my brain I get a lot done. But I think there's a certain depersonalization there that is very valid to how Severance works. And even though I was hanging out with people throughout that whole thing, it was a stream of consciousness moment versus like actually being present with myself, not having to worry about deliverables for at least 2.5 days, and just looking outside and going, "Oh wow, I like the sun. I like the fresh air after it rains. Your Audi likes the fresh air." No, stuff like that. So yeah, that's what makes the show fun to talk about. Thank you, Ray, for us figuring out our schedules and doing all this. We will see you on the next edition of this show, recapping the next episode. Thank God we got 5 more of these bitches left.
Thank God. And
halfway through.
For everyone out there watching, praise Kier.
Praise Kier. Also, for everyone out there watching who's just catching up, because I saw a lot of folks in the comments, go ahead. It's a heavy show, and these are heavy times. So take your time. Season 3 is not going to be made very quickly, and we'll have the opportunity to go through season 1. And I'm not going to make any promises, but Ray and I are like 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from most of the Severance cast. So we'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can do. Okay. So
we'll rustle up some interviews for you all.
We will try. And if not, put it in our performance review. Anyways, thank you very much for listening and watching. If I had more time and more of my brain space, I would raid someone. But we'll see you on Thursday with Power Report. We'll see you next week with another Severance episode. And yes, until then, Kier, wonderful Kier. Bye.